Hello, everyone. This is Ghada Ala. I've been working in the development sector for more than 8 years, focusing on innovation and partnerships. And lately, I've been focusing on bridging the gap between the development sector and high-end technologies. And it's my pleasure today to welcome you to the webinar from the GC webinar series, the aftermath of the COVID-19, the new social impact ecosystem. Today, I'm very honored to welcome with you all Professor Surya Deva, and the title of his webinar is Gender Bias and New Technologies, What Should Businesses Do? As we all know, technologies nowadays have a significant positive and negative impact on individuals and on their human rights in the coming years. For example, it has been increasingly clear that many technologies have had different positive and negative experiences, specifically when it comes to artificial intelligence, to automation, algorithms, facial recognition, and a lot of them have actually already contributed or differentiated impact on the women specifically and their human rights. Many technologies have developed in a way that they are gender neutral, or they have actually reinforced existing gender bias against women, consciously or unconsciously. But however, we are not trying to put technology as the enemy here, but we're trying to see how technology can actually be part of the solution. And against this backdrop today, the seminar is going to explore and focus on the human rights responsibility of businesses linked to new technologies. It will also highlight some of the steps that relevant businesses can and should take in line with the gender framework of the UN guiding principles on business and human rights in order to remove the gender bias from new technologies and to harness their potential in achieving the gender equality in society. And in order to learn more about this and to get more insights, we are very happy and pleased to have with us Professor Surya Deva, who is an associate professor at the School of Law of City University of Hong Kong. And currently he is the vice chair of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. Professor Deva has also done his primary research interest in business and human rights, China and India constitutional law, and sustainable development. Professor Deva has also published extensively in these areas, and he is one of the founding editors-in-chief of the Business and Human Rights Journal, and he sits on the editorial advisory board of the Netherlands Quarterly of Human Rights, the Vienna Journal of International Constitutional Law, and the Indian Law Review, and last but not least, the Australian Journal of Human Rights. Professor Deva, we're very happy to have you with us today, and I will leave the floor now for you, and we're gonna hear and talk to Professor Deva for 30 minutes, and we encourage everyone, if you have any questions, please write them in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geda, and I hope everyone can hear me. And I would also like to thank Dr. Ali for the invitation. It's my great pleasure to be able to share my thoughts on this particular issue. I'm going to share my screen. I hope you can see the screen. So basically, I would like to talk about this intersection of new technologies, human rights, and gender bias. And I would like to approach this issue in these 4 parts. I would like to briefly start with the interrelationship between technology and human rights, and then I talk about the gender bias element. And I will try to give some concrete examples of this gender bias, and then try to explain what are the reasons for this potential gender bias. And then I talk about the solutions in terms of the way forward. So let me start with this particular issue. Now, technologies are there with us for many, many centuries. There's nothing new about it, right? But here we are talking about today, new technologies. How are they different? And I think on this slide, I have put, in my view, some key differences. In terms of the reach of new technologies, the speed, the efficiency, they're very different from the technologies that we had in the past. There's also a crucial element. That crucial element is about agency, the issue of consent. In the past, if you want to travel in the aeroplane, that is a technology, you can decide whether to travel or not. But in modern time, many of the technologies are impacting us without our consent, without we having the agency, and we are just part of that process anyway in the society. So I think there are significant differences between the technologies of yesterday and technologies of today. Now, of course, technologies can impact human rights in a both positive and negative way. And I would like to suggest that some technologies could arguably be neutral. And if they are neutral, then they can be used either in a positive way or in a negative way. Perhaps internet could be an example. Internet can be used to connect with the family and friends, to sell and buy things, to book hotels. But you can also use internet to do human trafficking, right? Then we have some technologies which are having a dual purpose. And a typical example here are the ammunitions, arms and ammunitions. They can be used in a positive manner as a self-defense, but they can also be used to kill others and sometimes to kill innocent people. At the same time, I would say there's a third possibility, and the third possibility is that the technologies can be developed which are mostly going to have a negative impact on human rights. So I think those possibilities do exist. Now, before we move on to the new types of technologies, let us look at the old technologies, and I have put some here so that we understand the context and how they have impacted men and women differently. Let us take a steam engine as an example. Before steam engines was there, it is quite possible that the men were working hard in the factories, and steam engines reduced the hard labor done by men. So the positive impact of a steam engine in those cases is going to be beneficial more for men rather than for women. On the other hand, if we assume in a patriarchal society that the clothes laundry is done by women at home, then washing machines are going to be more positive for women, right? And again, we can analyze those examples, but the point I was trying to make is that the impact of technologies need not be identical or the same on both men and women. And also, when we talk about women, or when we talk about men as well, we should not consider that all women are the same. There is this element of intersectionality, which is quite relevant. And that's where the multiple forms of discrimination could become quite relevant. And of course, when we talk about gender bias, this gender bias could also be against men. But of course, I'm focusing only on bias against women, but the same argument could be made against men or someone else as well. So when we talk about intersectional form of discrimination, you will notice that based on the age, migration, the family status, the language, religion, women could be impacted by a particular technology differently. Let us take a concrete situation. So let us consider X, and X is a woman here. And because she's a woman, she may face discrimination simply because she's a woman. Now let us add the second variable here, her religion. She is a Muslim woman, and merely because she is a Muslim, and if that happens to be, let us say, a minority religion in a particular society, that may add some dimension of discrimination. The third possibility could be the sexual orientation of that woman. If she does not fit into the typical heterosexual norm of sexuality, then that could be the third layer of discrimination. And the fourth element could be if she suffers from some kind of a disability. So basically, I can definitely add more, but my point is that we should not consider all men or all women having the same impact of anything, whether technology or something else. And based on those variables, the impact could be very, very different. Now, let us try to unpack a little bit the bias that we may be facing or experiencing in terms of technology. And I would say there are three broad possibilities here. One possibility is that the technology has been created in a gender neutral way. And because it does not take into account the diversity in society, and algorithms are a good example of it, it is quite possible that they may come up with something which is biased against either men or women. The second possibility, which is quite significant in many cases, is that we already have discrimination in societies all over the world without any exception. I think the only difference is the nature and the extent of discrimination that women experience. Now, if there is already a discrimination and there are already some social norms which are discriminatory and how we think and how we perceive those values in a patriarchal setup. For instance, on this figure, you will see that the pilots, when you fly in an aeroplane, of course, because of the COVID, the situation is very different. But if you go back when you used to fly, you will notice that if you are hearing a female voice from the cockpit, that is unusual. And that is unusual because you are getting used to a male voice coming out of the cockpit of an aeroplane, right? On the other hand, when you're talking about nurses, like here, nurses are not there, but let us say in a hospital setting, you will find most of the nurses are women. So you have those gender bias and stereotypes in terms of the jobs, who will do what, segregation is there, and those biases can be picked and reinforced by technologies. The third possibility could be, and this is an example I picked from India, the country from where I come, that sometimes a technology may be created. Here we're talking about ultrasound technology, which may be created to find out if there is any infirmity in the fetus. But that could be used or misused, I would say, to know the sex of a fetus and go for abortion, right? So I think there are those three broad possibilities in my view that we can talk about this bias. Now, what are we talking about when we say that these are the new technologies, right? So on this slide, I have put some examples of these new technologies that we're talking about. We are, of course, dealing with artificial intelligence, which is a big thing at this particular point of time. Of course, automation is a big thing. If you ask Amazon or if you ask many multinationals, they are using robots nowadays in their factories. Then, of course, we have algorithms which are telling how, let us say, driverless car is going to run on the streets. We have then cryptocurrency, which is again going to become quite dominant, it seems, in years to come. And of course, we have other issues like facial recognition, and then of course raises those particular issues, both in a positive way as well as a negative way. Positive could be that you can track a person if someone is carrying COVID-19, right? So technology can be used in a positive way. But of course, facial recognition can also be misused. Now, I'm going to give 6 concrete examples or case studies to show this gender bias that is visible in technologies. My first example is this. If you look at those virtual voice assistants, whether they are of Amazon, Google, Samsung, Apple, if you look at the names itself are female. Secondly, the default voice in many of those voice assistants is of a female. And here what is happening is that they are reinforcing a gender norm which exists in society already. If you look at the offices of either the private sector or a public sector, what you will notice is that at the reception, at the front, most of the time you'll find women sitting there, right? So that is the expectation. And then when you're creating these voice assistants, then you are picking up the social norm and you are assuming and thinking that it has to be a woman. So that is my first example of this bias. The second case study that I would like to highlight is cryptocurrency. It's becoming very popular all over the world, and perhaps in future this might become more popular. But what you notice is that if you look at the percentage of women who are dealing with cryptocurrency, that is in the single digit. At this point of time, the estimate is there are only 5 to 7% women who are involved in cryptocurrency. Now, if that is going to be the data profile of the users of cryptocurrency, then of course, women are going to be at a significant disadvantage in how this trading is going to be done and what you can buy and what you can do and not do about this. The third case study, and this is in fact based on a research which is done by a group in Europe, that algorithms can also create some bias in terms of how the job advertisements are targeted. So what this civil society organization did in Europe, they placed advertisements in several countries in Europe of different jobs. Let us say truck drivers, nurses, or care workers. So what Facebook did, it targeted the advertisement. So if it was an advertisement for truck drivers, it was targeted towards men, because the assumption was the truck driver is likely to be a man. So it's better to target men only. On the other hand, if it was about the care work at home or school teachers, it was targeted towards women. That basically means that it is quite possible that if you have a woman who wants to be a truck driver, and she is very much interested to do that, and she is based in a particular city or in a particular country where the job is available, she may miss out on this opportunity, right? So I think this is, again, a classical example of the gender bias that technology is reinforcing because of the algorithms. The fourth case study that I would like to offer here is that how automation is going to impact the workforce. And of course, it is very likely that both men and women are going to be impacted by automation. But it is also possible that in certain sector, let us say the garment industry, where 80% of the workers are women, and if the companies are going to introduce robots in the garment sector, which is very easy to do, then who will lose the jobs? It will not be men, it will be women, because 80% of the workers currently are women. So I think it is possible there could be some disproportionate impact on women of the automation. The fifth example I would like to give here is about this study about the self-driving cars. As you know, the technology is being developed and tested. Can we have driverless cars, right? Now, the study shows that because there could be some bias in the data collection and algorithms, it is possible that the people of color, the car may not recognize. And of course, these people of color could also be women. And that's where the element of intersectionality comes into picture. So if you are a woman and a woman of color, then the car may not detect you, right? So again, that shows that if you don't get the data right, that bias may be there in the technology. My last example for now is that sometimes something which may look very positive may also become problematic. So here what you see is that in certain countries, they're already using the data based on algorithm to find out whether a particular offender is going to commit the offense again or not. And then based on this, they will decide, the court will decide whether to grant a bail to a person or not. And there is some evidence based on research done in the US that this system may backfire against women because it may overpredict women committing those offenses again. But in reality, it is quite possible that the women may not commit those offenses again. So again, that bias may decide the question whether someone is going to get a bail or not. It's a question of serious question of life and liberty. So I think those examples I gave to show that how technologies could be biased. Now, what are the regions? Again, there are multiple regions, but I think a starting point for us should be that if the experiences of women are not taken into account, that may contribute to bias. And there is a plenty of data that in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, the number and the percentage of women or girls is significantly less all over the world, without any exception. And if that is the case, who is going to create these technologies? It is likely they will be created by men, and they will be based on the experiences of men, and they may also be meant to solve the problems and challenges faced by men. That could be one explanation of this bias, and that is something we need to fix, I guess. I will skip that slide. So second issue that I would like to highlight is, and I already gave some examples of that, that the bias may already be there in society. And then the technology is going to reinforce that bias through stereotypes or some patriarchal social norms. And I think those norms are very much there with us. I already gave you the example that when it comes to the pilot of a plane, you tend to think of a male. On the other hand, if it's a nurse, you tend to think of a woman, right? So I think that is a stereotype that we have created. But sometimes it is also more deeply embedded into the system. On this slide, you see these are the top 500 companies listed by Fortune in 2020. And what you will notice is that how many women are the chief executive officers of these big multinational companies. In a way, you may think this is positive because the number is going up and up. So there was a situation in the year 2000 that there were only 2 out of 500. So in the last 20 years, one can argue we are making progress. And I think that is definitely a plausible argument. But overall, it stays within the single digit. It is 3 to 5 to 7, 8%. This is very low. How do we explain this data? It can perhaps be argued that women are not really meant to be leaders. They are not good enough to be leaders. They can't really lead a Fortune 500 company. Or is it because of more deep-rooted patriarchal structures which does not allow these women to rise up to that level, right? So I think those are the critical questions that we should be asking. And I think those issues may also be reflected in technologies. Same may apply in terms of the care work or the household work. In most of the cases, not in every country, but in many countries, the work is often done by women and it is not paid. And if it is not paid and it is done mostly by women, then the technologies may reinforce and may just continue and perpetuate this kind of a bias. I will give you a concrete example. And this example is in fact from Hong Kong. So what a hospital in Hong Kong did a couple of months back, it introduced a robotic nurse. So this is a robotic nurse. And I think the idea of a robotic nurse is very good because it can reduce the burden of work on nurses. It can also help in those situations, let us say a situation like COVID pandemic, where instead of a human being, a robotic nurse is doing some testing, let us say with the patient, or you're trying to carry certain things from here to there within the hospital, right? So this looks a very positive and empowering use of a robotic nurse. But what happens is problematic here on this slide, right? Because you are assuming a nurse to be a woman, and even if it is a robotic nurse, you are creating a gender for her. And that's why the patients in the hospital start talking about, hey, Moxie, hey, girl, how is it going? So then you are reinforcing those biased values and stereotypes, even in the context of technologies. And I already mentioned to you in terms of virtual assistants, how they use those female voices and names. Of course, because of this critique, things are changing now. But I think that predominantly that remains the situation. The third explanation could be that the rules and policies, even in relation to technologies, they are drafted in a way which is not gender sensitive or gender responsive. And I think that gender bias is allowed to continue because you're not challenging that. You are not trying to fix it. You're not trying to address it. And I think those issues are again going to be quite problematic. So I'm running out of time, but I think I still have 5-6 minutes, I understand. So I would like to now finally talk about the solutions. What could be the way forward? And again, I have 3 or 4 suggestions for your consideration. My first suggestion is that whenever we talk about new technologies, most of the time they're developed and supplied by companies. If that is the case, these companies are expected to conduct under international standards like the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, what we call human rights due diligence. So the first point is that when they do the human rights due diligence, that should be gender responsive. And if it is gender responsive, and I will explain a little bit later what it means, and hopefully they will be able to address some of the biases that I was highlighting in this presentation. But before we do that, before we talk about the gender responsiveness, let us quickly understand human rights due diligence. Some of you, I am sure, know this already, but for the benefit of everyone who is listening to this webinar, if you do not know, basically this is a central idea of Pillar 2 of UN Guiding Principles. And the idea is that businesses should not do any harm, any adverse impact on human rights. And if they cause that adverse impact on human rights, they should try to fix it. What should companies do? They should do three things. They should make a policy commitment that we will respect human rights. They should have this ongoing process of conducting due diligence. And finally, they should have a process to remediate, provide remediation if there are adverse impacts on that. Let us pick up on this human rights due diligence element. It has 4 steps. I would like to pick one example. Let us take a company. You have a factory, and it has to do an impact assessment that how the workers are being treated by the manager, right? So if it tries to find out that there are incidents of, let us say, sexual harassment, or you find out that the company is not paying the women workers same salary as the male workers, which is again very well established that there is a gender pay gap, right? So then if you find those issues which are problematic from a human rights perspective, you try to integrate those findings and try to address those findings and try to fix it, right? So if you think that women are not getting paid on the equal footing, you find out what needs to change within the company to fix it. Then you try to track your responses, because some of the challenges that companies face, you cannot fix overnight. Then you can fix short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals and try to address those issues. And then final step is that you should be communicating those responses to your stakeholders, consumers, investors, civil society, government. Everyone should know what the company is doing or not doing to address those particular issues. Now, the point that I would like to highlight is that if businesses do not adopt a gender responsive perspective in continuing to do this due diligence, they may miss out in identifying the real impact on men and women differently. And I think I already mentioned to you that the impact on women itself could be very different. And that's why the cover of this gender guidance, you see there are different types of women who are representing here, right? Because all women may not experience the impact in the same way. So in fact, I had the privilege to develop the gender framework for the UN Working Group. So this was presented to the Human Rights Council in 2019, and it has been adopted widely now by institutions and businesses and civil society organizations. And the basic idea here is that there should be this responsiveness in terms of the assessment, and then what measures you take and what remedies you take, they are transformative in nature. Let me go back to my example of sexual harassment. So if there is a company and that company finds, oh, we are only getting 5 complaints of sexual harassment in a year, the company may think, oh, this is very positive. It seems everything is fine because no one is complaining about sexual harassment. So that may suggest to this company that there is no sexual harassment. I will suggest that the number is low because the company may not have adopted a gender responsive approach to assess it. Perhaps harassment is taking place, but women are not reporting, right? Or are you asking the right type of women, right? Or it could also be, of course, that the men are experiencing harassment and they are not reporting, right? So that underreporting could be there. So how do you collect this data? Are they feeling in the safe environment? That is very crucial. Then in terms of the responses, if you find that there are too many complaints coming, then you also need to look at the power structure in your company. What transformation you can make? Is it because that you have women in your company or in your factory who are the lower levels, but all the managers are men? So you have this patriarchal hierarchy. So can you change that hierarchy and empower women on an equal footing? And will that change something for the sexual harassment culture in a company? I think those are the issues that we need to look at. I also believe that in some cases, if we find a particular technology is highly problematic for women and it has a disproportionate impact on women, and the positive impact is not significant, then I think we should not perhaps allow this technology. That may be a controversial point, but something I wanted to make, because then who makes the judgment is something we can discuss later. The third suggestion is that technologies are good, but the question is who have access to these technologies and who is able to afford it. So if women are not able to have the access and affordable access to these technologies, then the discrimination that we already have in society is going to become worse. And I think that is where it becomes absolutely crucial that the governments, companies, civil society organizations, universities, trade unions, and everyone, they make sure that these technological solutions and innovations are equitably available to both men and women, and there is no disadvantage faced by either of them. My last point, and I will stop with this, is that preventing an adverse impact of technologies on women's rights is, of course, something which is crucial. But in my view, we also need to harness the potential of technologies to solve some of the challenges that women are facing in particular. So if you're talking about the unpaid care work at home, and we know this is done by women, can we create robots and automation to address this particular issue? Or are we going to create robots for factories to make women unemployed? I think that is the question we should be asking. Sexual harassment, of course, even men also face it. But the percentage of women facing sexual harassment all over the world is much larger. 1 in every 3 women is facing this. What can be the role of technology in those particular situations, right? We do not have enough political leaders or enough business leaders, as I did show in my data, in terms of companies. What could be the role of companies to address those particular issues? So I think we need to change technologies to resolve and solve some of these major challenges. Otherwise, we will not be able to achieve significant substantive gender equality in society. So thank you very much. I will stop with that. I think we still have about 25 minutes at least for questions. So I pass it back to Gada. You welcome any questions and comments from you or from the participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. It's been a very interesting points that you shared with us. I actually have a few comments and a number of questions I will try to minimize so that I give a chance to the audience. But I wanted to ask, so you think one of the main challenges is that we are lacking policies and regulations that are related to how technology and innovation works in most countries? So for example, in the Middle East, we are still struggling with having policies that regulate the work of innovation and technology. And for example, privacy settings and AI technology and this kind of tech specifically, do you think if there are more efforts put into this area of work, this challenge of gender bias would at least go down a bit and not be as, what can I say, like, it is a major problem now that we're facing. Do you think this would support the solution?
Yes, I would say that will be part of the solution. I think there is no one solution to fix the gender bias in society as such, right? And I think the same applies to gender bias in relation to technologies. So we need to take multiple measures. And I think one of the measures should definitely be in terms of the framework and the policies that are governing or regulating the creation, the development, the use of technologies. I think that has to become more gender responsive. And I would like to highlight here, it's not gender sensitive, it has to be gender responsive, because sensitiveness is the first stage. But merely being sensitive is not enough. You need to do something to appreciate how that differentiated impact is there, and how do you address that particular issue.
True, very true. Thank you so much. And I think from what I understood from you is one of the challenges is not only how do we solve this problem, but also how do we help women take part in creating technologies and solutions. And to do this, we need to start off from the very beginning of the educational system. What kind of digital education are young girls are getting worldwide? Are they even getting any? And if they are getting any form of digital education, is it enough to enable and empower them to use technology, understand technology, and also become more aware of its impact on them? And I think this is one of the most common challenges everywhere. I don't know if you have any experiences sharing with us, if you've seen any countries that were able to start off working on this path.
I think there's a growing realization that we need to have more women in terms of STEM courses, in terms of doing research, both academic research and creating those technologies. But I would say that the fundamental change must begin much earlier. When a child is born in a family, if it is a boy, you give that child trucks and aeroplanes and all those things. If it is a girl, we often give her the dolls and all this, right? So I think that is the stage when we are creating those stereotypes. And that is happening even much earlier than the school education. So I think we need to start changing those barriers and compartmentalized approach of how we perceive the role of men and women in societies. And I think those should be changed. And of course, the school education and creating more opportunities. I think it is much more than letting women work in the science department. But question is, do they feel part of it? Or is the culture in the work environment at universities or the engineers, is it a male culture? So even if a woman enters that, she feels, oh, I don't fit here, I would like to leave. I think we need to make this cultural shift. I think that will take time, but of course, we know that this is the way we need to follow, I think.
True. I would like now to take some questions from the audience, and I would like to ask Banyan Sharma, I think you had a question. If you would like to unmute yourself and share your question with the professor. Okay, if you're, I don't see your
yes,
present. Okay, yeah, okay. Please,
yeah,
go ahead.
Yes, yeah, it was a wonderful presentation. So my basic question is that, as far as, this gender bias is concerned, we are seeing, a lot of, disparity as far as, these big corporates are concerned, for example, Walmart, and some of these big firms, basically underpay, female labor force, and they get them to work, for lot of, hours and there. And some of these companies, even Amazon also is there, and some of these companies are much more, what you call are much more, related with the most technologically advanced and much more, considered to be a lot more savvy as far as as far as their work ethics are concerned. But they are still underpaying, and they are still, doing indulging in all this discrimination for the female labor force. And my second question is that, as far as the agriculture sector and regional disparities we see, for example, in India and Africa, where the female labor force, participation is very massive, in the agricultural sector or some of the underrated sector. For example, they basically have to go through a lot of, what you call, harsh conditions. For example, they have to face, these emissions, environmental, hazards, and etc. Natural calamities, etc. Working in these agricultural sectors for quite long hours. hours, for 15, and still they are being underpaid. And now with this automation, they have to face, this radiation from 5G cell towers, 4G cell towers, which are basically lot of, are a lot of scale, and this even this vehicular emissions, etc. Same is the case in the with the urban cities also. So basically, the point I'm making is that, how do you deconstruct this narrative, as far as technology is concerned, that it is basically working at scale, and it's basically providing support to everyone, because still we are seeing as far as 90% of the labor force are under inequalities are rising, and basically the labor force is not being able to cherish that sort of what you call benefits. So there's a lot of discrimination, and there's a lot of as far as paper is concerned, as far as and reality is concerned. So reality is something else, and the theory is something else. So how do you deconstruct that narrative, so that that these benefits can be shared by everyone, from top management, labor, everyone, and gender bias, etc. And it can be so that a lot of these it can be a help in growth and development for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Vineet, for the question and the examples that you gave from whether it's agriculture sector or the high tech companies that you mentioned. I think the gender bias is very much embedded into the current economic structures that we have. Now, the question is, how do we create a structure which is more fair for both men and women? And it is not leaving behind many of us in society, right? That is a real challenge. So I would say education is a very fundamental tool. So it's not merely literacy, but education. So I make a distinction between literacy and education. So if you are educated, then you should be sensitive to those differences, and you should be able to do something about it. I think that is definitely a starting point. Then I would say the governments would have to create incentives and disincentives. In Canada, for instance, the government has a gender impact assessment. Any decision, any policy taken by the Canadian government, they analyze it from a gender perspective. How is this going to impact women? So can we introduce this idea that any government policy, let us say in every country, they introduce a budget, they introduce a tax change and all this, right? How do we make an assessment, or trade and investment policies? They create a special economic zones. Countries are attracting investment, right? How do you make an impact assessment that how this policy is going to impact women in our country? And once you make this impact assessment, then you should be able to decide whether this is going to work for us or not. So I think there are solutions available, but I think we need to collectively work. First of all, we need to make those decision makers aware of it, whether the decision makers are in the private sector or they are in the public sector or public-private partnerships. They have to become aware of the need to mainstream a gender-responsive approach. Unless we mainstream it and it becomes part of the process, I think we will not be able to deconstruct what you have highlighted as the legitimate challenges in my view.
Thank you, Professor. I think also now we have, Divya Signal. You have your hand raised, and apologies if I don't pronounce your name correctly. Please pardon me.
Yeah, namaste. Thank you, Professor Surya Deva. Fantastic presentation. And you highlighted the access and affordability part. I'm presenting one example from latest NFHS National Family Health Survey report, which was released in December 2020. And just one example about the technology, that women who have ever used internet in India, if you see the latest report, if we compare men and women, there is a huge difference. On an average, less than 3 out of 10 women in rural India and 4 out of 10 women in urban India have ever used the internet. And when we are talking about technology, internet is a very basic thing. So there is a clear gender gap. Second example, which I want to point out, my own alumna, Vidhi, she started her own venture in 2015, which is a 90% women, staffed and women tailors run business. She says B2B world is still male dominated. When she goes for exhibitions, she always faces this kind of challenge that because when she started, she didn't have much staff. So her husband would accompany her during these exhibitions. And all the vendors would address the questions to her husband, who would very gently, address it to Vidhi. And Vidhi says that I am still struggling since like last 5-6 years. I'm still struggling, though I have a name, but still people address the queries to the male who is standing on the exhibition and not to me. So there's a clear one is the technology, basic internet usage, and another one is about the mindset. So that's two comments I have. Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Devaji. Thank you very much for giving these.
Doctor, you are on mute.
Sorry. Is it okay now? So I'll repeat myself. So thank you very much, Devaji. These were two excellent examples that you gave. I'm sure they can be related in other parts of the world as well. So I would say India is not unique when it comes to gender discrimination or access to technologies. I mean, there are many women in the global south who may experience it in a similar manner. And I think that is where this whole idea of that you create a technological hub and you don't see that who needs to benefit more. I would like to bring here Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi. He used to say that the people, you should try to see who is the last person standing in the queue. I'm simplifying it. But basically his idea was that the last person is standing in the queue, who is the least, at the bottom of the pyramid, he or she should benefit most first, right? So if you're introducing a technology in the rural part of India or any country for that matter, I think it should be the priority to make those women aware how to use the internet, right? And even if they have the internet, the question is, if you don't have the phones in which you can use the internet, and who will buy those phones for these women, right? So I think there are those issues related to the economics of this access. And of course, you highlighted the cultural and stereotype barriers that may be there. So we need to also break this cultural mindset in which it's a male-dominated culture. And I think it will take many, many years, but I think we need to keep fighting. And I think men have a key role to play here. And I hope there's some men like me who are listening to this webinar. So we are part of the problem, and I think we have to become part of the solution going forward.
Thank you so much, Professor. I also think we have Aisha Jawad.
Just call me Surya. That is also part of the structure of power imbalance, right? If I can call you by your first name, you should.
Yeah, I agree. We're just used to this.
We need to break the structures of power, in my view.
I agree.
That's how these things start.
And then this is why also we're encouraging everyone to raise their hands. You can talk to yourself, to Surya and ask the questions. And we want to have a live engagement with everyone. So I would ask Aisha Jawad, I think you had a question as well. If you may unmute yourself. Aisha, are you here?
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Aisha. Good to see you.
Hello, Dr. Surya. How are you?
I'm very good. You can just call me Surya.
What a lovely presentation. When you're talking about the stereotyping, we have seen it in Islamic society in particular, that the roles have been associated with women, and it is very difficult for women to come forward. So how do you think, yes, you're very right, that gender sensitivity is the very initial thing, which we need to work on, education and stereotyping to be ruled out from the very beginning. But how do you think that, because we all know that legislation is not going to help. So how this cultural thinking based on the religious norms can be shifted? Because that's what I particularly talk about Pakistan, that Pakistan has been suffering because there's so many technological ventures where women cannot go and participate just on the thing that they're not for women. And even when I was doing law, I have had a clear opposition from my own home that this is not for women. So how do you think that this can be changed or shifted? Thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. I think one thing which could be done perhaps is if we can showcase better these success stories of, let us say, a woman like you becoming a lawyer and being successful, and still maintain the social fabric and everything, and you can also do well professionally. I think those success stories may help changing this cultural stereotypes, in my view. And I think we would also need some male and female champions, right? There is also some organizations who talk about those women at the table kind of an initiative, right? So you need women in positions of power, and I would say real power. When we say seat at the table, I would really like a real seat with powers, because sometimes that seat is very symbolic. I would like to give one concrete example from my country, India. So the government has made reservations that in the villages, I think if I remember correctly, 30% village heads could be women. Now, in many cases, including in my own village in India, where the village head should be a woman, in reality, what is happening is it is the wife of the head. So wife is contesting the election as a nominal candidate. Real power is with the male, the husband of that woman, right? So that is not seat at the table. We really need to change that idea that you can just put a woman symbolically to tick the box. We're talking about a transformation. We're talking about not a charity, but a substantive equality sharing of power, right? And I think women are equally good, and they deserve to be there, and they should be leading. So I think more positive case studies, more leadership, more sharing of power, more capacity building. We need many of this together.
Thank you so much for this last point. And I think I totally agree also with you that women need a true seat, and they also need to be empowered enough to take decisions, to be responsible for what they decide for, to be responsible for having a voice in taking decisions that would affect other people's lives, and not just be there for the sake of the superficial equality that some companies at some point do just to have a number of women on the board, but they don't really have access to decision making or to really being part of the process. I think Dr. Ali, you wanted to say something?
No, I'm fine. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So if there are any more questions that we would love to hear them, either you can share it in the chat box or you can just raise your hands. We have a few minutes left. If not, I'm very curious, Surya, to ask you if you can give us in a minute or two, have you witnessed good examples of how technology was able actually to uplift women more and to really be more sensitive and aware and responsive to gender bias in any context that you witnessed?
Yes, I think there are some good examples. I would like to share two. One is that an app, a mobile app was developed in which the women workers in factories could share in confidence what their experiences are, whether it is the less payment or they're facing any kind of harassment. or let us say if the woman is pregnant and she is not getting enough toilet breaks. So that information can be shared in confidence with someone who we know is going to respond positively. So I think that application, I would say, is something which is a positive case study, because that allows those women workers to communicate their grievances in a safe environment. The second is access to finance, because something I did not mention in my presentation, but which is very much the case. If you want to start a new business, in many cases, you need to obtain a loan. To obtain a loan, you need some kind of a collateral, whether you have a house or a piece of land or something, right? And women don't, in many cases, don't own a piece of land or the houses, or the number is very less as compared to men, right? So the chances of women starting their own business are going to be less. And if you can't start your own business, then the poverty or economic inequality may be perpetuated. So in those situations, the banks have started reaching out to these women to give them small loans. Again, they are using those technological tools. So I think technologies can definitely be very empowering for all of us. But I think we need to look at especially disadvantaged or marginalized sections in society. And of course, in many societies, unfortunately, women should not fall into this category of marginalization, because they have the population, I mean, right? But unfortunately, that's where we are. And I think the companies and the governments should proactively use technologies to overcome those biases, in my view.
Thank you so much. I think it's very important to look as well at positive examples, to learn from them and to see how they were able to overcome the challenges that we've been discussing. And again, as you mentioned, it's a long process. It doesn't have one solution to solve this problem. It has different stakeholders, whether it's government, civil society, the private sector. Also, I think the entrepreneurs who are currently working on new technologies and solutions that they want to help societies with, they need to be more aware of these issues in order to avoid them from the very beginning and educate themselves and their teams on them as well, so that we would see a change in the coming generations of solutions and technologies that are to come. And I think we have 2 more minutes. So I am encouraging anyone, if you have any comments or questions, this is your chance. Yes, I think we have Atif Ahmed. Please, if you can unmute yourself. Atif, can you hear me?
Hello, yeah, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, well, my question is actually about, how we can achieve what we call it the equality for transgender, especially for the women and girls who transferred into women and girls. I always see that there is gender bias against them, and I think that the laws also is one of the obstacles which impede the equality in that matter. So how do you see the role of laws in stopping the gender bias against the transgender? Particularly for women and girls. Thank you.
Thank you. I briefly mentioned sexual orientation when I was talking about intersectionality, but you're absolutely right. The LGBTI community, they face significant amount of discrimination. Again, I think we need to raise more awareness and sensitivity that all of us are equal, and our personal sexual preferences should not be taken against us. And I think all of us are entitled to all human rights based on the idea of human dignity, which is central, right? So I think we should respect that. And I think I would say law has a key role to play here, because law can create a signaling environment that we do not tolerate discrimination. That could be a good starting point. But I think we also need to create opportunities. For instance, many LGBTI communities, they face discrimination in booking hotels or eating out in restaurants, right? So if the shops can display some stickers that LGBTI people are welcome, then that is a positive sign, right? They will be encouraged to that. So I think we need to take proactive and positive steps in those particular situations. Same may apply to hotel industry. And of course, there are companies already doing it. So I'm picking those examples from what is already happening. But thank you for this question. Again, I will pass it back to you because I think we are almost finishing.
We're wrapping up now. Thank you so much for everyone for being with us today, and thank you, Surya, for being so generous with your experiences and giving us different insights into the matter. And I was really fortunate to be with you today, and I want to thank everyone again for. I want to thank Dr. Ali for giving me this chance, and also for everyone for participating with us today. And we look forward to welcoming you this week on Wednesday, the 23rd of June at 7 p.m. We're going to be featuring Dr. Raymond from University of Basel. And the topic is going to be business diplomacy. And we are really looking forward to having you all join us. Thank you so much and have a great day. Surya, if you want to say a few words, please, the mic is yours.
Thank you. I would like to thank you. It was a pleasure for me as well to be in this webinar with you. So it's my pleasure. And thank you, Dr. Ali, for inviting me. And let us keep working for a better society. Bye for now.
Thank you.